So, on the long run, it is up to the individuals, the local governments, the federal government, and the, education of public safety for us to know what the flood hazards are. So, there are many steps that we can take towards minimizing the flood hazard, as we have seen in the previous slides. But overall, it is up to us to know what the flood hazard is. So those flood hazards may be known based on the different stage, 10-year stage flood or flood stage, I should say, 100-year flood stage, 500-year flood stage, and whatnot that we have. So those can be mapped, and those usually are mapped by different contractors from local governments and federal governments. And they are or should be distributed for individuals, and they should be available for the public safety of the people and for them to know and educate themselves. So another way in which we can adjust to these flood hazards are going to be through purchasing flood insurance. So FEMA on the national level requires 100-year floodplain maps to determine the risk at which people are in if you are building within the 100-year flood mapped area. So new owners are now required to buy flood insurance if they are within that 100-year floodplain or flood stage level. And then on the more local level, there are certain building codes that have to be met for getting flood-proof building. And now, more so than before, there is prohibition to build within the 20-year floodplain anymore. So Boise is actually a very good place that has taken steps into both, adjusting to the flood hazard in the future and also restoring the river to what it used to be before, as I said. There are certain areas, yes, where we have built too close to the river to do anything about it, if not destroying the infrastructure. But there are certain other places where we are letting the river kind of take its natural course without building any further, which is great. So from the National Flood Insurance Reform Act of 1994, there were a few things that were done. So now the flood proving that has to be done has to meet raising or has to do things such as raising foundations of the houses that are within that floodplain or flood stage. Have flood walls in certain locations. Also waterproof construction, have waterproof construction for places that are within the flood stages. And also have drains and pumps available to be ready whenever the flood event will occur, could potentially occur. So all of those are part of the things that came into being laws after the National Flood Insurance Reform Act of 1994. So there are other strategies that we have for adjustment to the hazard that also came from the National Flood Insurance Reform Act of 1994. One of those is going to be structural controls, and by that they mean things like the levees and the flood walls and whatnot. But then another thing that we can do is flood hazard mapping. So we've talked about this already, and in fact you have to do a little bit of that for your lab assignment this week. You're going to have to map flood recurrence intervals for, I believe it's I think it's a 10-year, a 100-year, and a 500-year flood. It could be a 50, 100, and 500. I forgot already. I'm sorry. But you're going to have to map those areas that are susceptible to flooding on what flood stage they would be. So those maps are very valuable to communities and again to the overall state, so that no infrastructure is built on those areas, and the infrastructure that is built in those areas can be either relocated. People who are on those areas can either relocate, or they can take steps into minimizing the effects that they would see from flooding of their homes or of the specific infrastructure that is in that area. Also, as kind of funny little picture, we're gonna be susceptible, or we're gonna have to know that there are areas that are susceptible to flooding, regardless. So on the long term, I think we should think about relocating anything that communities have built within those 100-year floodplains, at least, or flood stages, I believe. So this table, which is also from your book, I highly recommend you go through it. I'm not going to go through it right now because I would just be reading off it, but I highly encourage you to look through it if you live in an area that is close to a river that could potentially flood, and especially if you live in an area within the 100-year flood stage. So again, it's in your book, but it's also here in the slides. Check it out. And that is all I have for you this week. So if you guys have any questions, email me about them. Your lab assignment is a little bit hard. You have to use Excel and everything is in the weekly lab module, but do your best. The map provided is not very good. It's very hard to read, and certain of the contour lines that are mapped in there are hard to see. So I know that it's going to be challenging, but do your best. And if you have any questions or need assistance, please let me know as soon as you can. Other than that, make sure you also do your discussion board and get your quizzes submitted. The discussion board this week is kind of fun, so I'm excited to see what all are the events that you guys have mapped around the globe this week. Okay, I'll see you, or I won't see you, but you'll be hearing from me next week with more information. Have a good week, guys.